Look at the rawhide rawing away.
Yeah, I'm just changing moisture content snad because I need them somewhere between there.
Leatherworking as a craft has been around for ages. And today we're going to be looking at a very interesting and very unique sub-niche of leatherworking that's known as rawhide braiding. To start with, you've got to understand a little bit about rawhide. Rawhide is the full hide of the animal, but not tanned, just dried. The tanning process is what converts an animal hide into the leather that we all know and love and use. Rawhide is basically an animal hide that has been removed, scraped, dehaired, and dried out. It's a completely different material than leather, and it has different uses. One of the areas where rawhide performs really well is as horse gear, specifically the bosal and hackamores and riatas of the vaquero tradition. Now, vaquero horsemanship traces its roots back to the 15th and 16th centuries, when the Spanish arrived in Mexico and began raising livestock throughout what is now Mexico and most of the American West. The rawhide worked especially well in the drier climates of California, Arizona, Nevada, and eastern Oregon, and an entire tradition of horsemanship developed around these cowboys, or vaqueros, and their gear and methods.
Current wind.
A hackamore like this is most often used for training a horse. Vaqueros would use this sort of a rig to start a colt instead of putting a bit in the horse's mouth at the beginning of his education. Think of it like training wheels on a bicycle. In this case, the rawhide has the perfect amount of flex, and the technical term for this is boing, by the way, and hardness that will allow a rider to communicate through the bridle reins straight to the horse. Some folks say that breaking a colt with a hackamore does as much to train the rider as to train the horse.
The nose button foundation is in place. When I wrap that nose button foundation on there, you can see there's some gaps in here. And the reason is I wrapped it on there bent into a horse shape. I wrapped it on and got it all secured, and then I pried it out to straight to get it sanded. But this bosal is going to naturally relax back into its horse shape. I braid this button on by taking my strings, crowning them, and braiding down over one, under one. On the other end, we'll come back the other way. And when we arrive back here at this end, the braid will be complete. And I'll have an option of either scattering my splices through the length of the nose button at places that I think are handy, or else anchoring them through and underneath this anchor button and cutting off my ends where they'll be covered by the hanger and won't bother the horse or look untidy. I use both of those methods.
A lot of the iconic imagery that we all think of when we visualize cowboys in the American West is really an image of that vaquero tradition. The big silver spurs, the braided leather, the lassos, the western roping saddles, a lot of it. In fact, most of the items you think of originated, or at least are very similar to what originated in the vaquero horsemanship tradition.
I started braiding in 1993, almost on accident. I didn't realize that there was something out there called rawhide braiding that I wanted to do. I had seen some braided knots and they were interesting, but I picked up a knot that was half tied and started thinking about it, and was just fascinated by the relationship of the strings and what they were achieving together and in balance with each other. It's pretty straightforward. There's strings wrapping clockwise and counterclockwise, and sometimes you wind up with a string doing something wild and bites in the middle of your braid and things like that if you're doing something really fancy. But for the most part, it's just strings wrapping clockwise and counterclockwise and doing it consistently in a tidy way. because we make some nice braid. And I enjoyed that quite a bit. The skeleton button, the frame, the over one, under one portion of this multiple string button is complete. And so now I'm taking all of my strings that spiral counterclockwise and I am weaving them all through here. From the bottom up to the top. And when we get them all through, I'll decide where I'm gonna bury the ends, and I'll bring up the strings, which will spiral clockwise. I'm following a braiding path right now. That's a path between two strings.
The methods that these cowboys used for making their horse gear was critical and integral to their way of life. The hackamores and bosals were absolutely vital tools for training their horses, and an entire technique of braiding and craftsmanship developed to create this gear along with the horsemanship. That's what you're watching Steve make, a rawhide hackamore. And as you can see, the crafts continued to develop long past what would simply be a useful tool into stunning displays of craftsmanship and detail. But in rawhide braiding, unlike a lot of other practical art forms, form follows function without any conflict at all.
The heel knot has to be spliced really strongly. And to have a good heel knot splice, I like to use every single string in both sides of the band in one of the 3 knots here. So there are 8 on this top, 4 from each side that are crowned and walled to make essentially a ring knot. And then there are 12 here on the bottom, crowned and walled to make another ring knot. And then the rest of the strings are tied around the top. But the foundation isn't very level. It's kind of lumpy. I could braid over it like that, but I like to have a good stout foundation, and I like to have one that's nice and symmetrical. So, because I'm a saddle maker and not just a braider, I will use glue.
Now, Steve became interested in this braiding at a young age, and he has basically devoted his entire working life to figuring out and continuing this tradition. Like a lot of other ancient trades, for a long time, these were closely held and guarded secrets, right? Trade secrets, with lots of braiders choosing to take their tricks to the grave rather than share the things they'd learned over a lifetime of braiding. But thankfully for us, and a lot of youngsters around here, Steve takes a different approach and is much more concerned with keeping the craft alive and making sure the techniques are not lost. He's absolutely meticulous about his work, and the process, and this level of attention to detail starts long before the braiding that you're watching here. In fact, with this hackamore you're watching right now, Steve butchered the cow, removed the hide, and stretched and made the rawhide himself. It was an old cow that belonged to our friend Cy Swan. Steve prefers to use the hides from old cows whose health is declining for making the rawhide because the hide is more dense and it's thinner, so it doesn't have to be split as many times to get it down to the right thickness. It's interesting to me that the characteristics of the rawhide, much more than the leather that comes from a tannery, is dictated by the age, the sex, and the condition of the animal itself. Now, there are not a lot of people in the world today who understand this craft at the highest level, but there are a few. When Steve was starting out, he was helped by his brother Mike. Later, Duff Sevier and Bill Black, two of the very best, helped Steve move forward in a big way. And yes, there are, as you would expect, others like Daniel Posse and Nate Wald, who are busy braiding in their shops and putting out gear that is beautiful and functional. But I know that I consider myself lucky to be able to get a close look at work like this being done right here in my hometown. You know, there's a lot of satisfaction to be found in creating things and then completing them to virtual perfection at the very highest level, like what Steve is doing here. However, there is also a lot of satisfaction to be found in doing something new for the first time and creating something with your hands. It doesn't even matter too much whether it's woodworking or leatherworking, metal fabricating, pottery, home repair, gardening, heck, even auto repair. Or maybe it would be rawhide braiding. Sometimes just starting a new craft and then learning the basics and fundamentals and making simple projects can be incredibly rewarding and open new doors in your life. Thank you for watching Essential Craftsman, and keep up the good work.
This is the hackamore. If I untied it, this part would be called the bozal. This particular bozal I've used a lot. It's been a good one for me. It's a 1/2-inch bozal, a medium type of hackamore that you make a saddle horse in. This, when you look at it, is an elongated upside down teardrop. Part of it up here that's thicker is called the nose button, and this knob on the end that acts as a weight is called the heel knot, and it covers the splice of the band. When band strings run together down here at the bottom, you splice those and create your heel knot foundation. This strap of beveled latigo leather is the hanger, and this horsehair rope is the McCarty rope. It's the set of reins and a lead together. The hackamore is what it does. It is both materially this band, and it's the space that the band surrounds. The hackamore is a tool, and it's a way of training horses, but it's also a way of thinking about yourself and thinking about the world that infers how it's used. In order for the hackamore to work really well, it needs to be springy. To be springy, if the ride is springy and you construct it well, the hackamore will flex throughout its length. The flex you see right here in the nose button, it's really important to the function of the hackamore. I think most braiders will agree that buttons can be learned, braids can be memorized, knives can be sharpened, but making good rawhide is the difficult part. It starts with the right hide, it starts with the right time of year, it starts with the correct way of handling the hide from the time that you process the cow to the time that you're cutting the strings and actually braiding it. And braiding rawhide is an art and a mystery. It's a little bit separate from the art of braiding. Both of them need to be learned. Rawhide needs to be springy. This is the band. And this band is braided over a double twist core.
and the whole thing is even from one side to the other. When I process this cow, I think this cow might have come actually from the Swan Ranch. I'm not certain. I've scalded this hide, I think, and stretched it, slacked the hide as it was drying, and then I split the hide from neck down to tail, and that gave me a top line. The strings for my core and the strings for my band are cut off that top line. The reason I cut my hackamore strings from the top line is it gives me a very consistent string from one end to the other without soft spots in it. And if one end of the string is a little harder than the other, let's say the butt is a little harder than the neck, or I have to split down the butt a little bit so the butt is a little softer and the neck is full thickness. If I put half my butt strings on one end and half the neck strings on the other, so on this 16 plat hackamore, I will have 8 strings on the neck and 8 strings on the butt, and then the other 8 strings are facing the other direction. Then my strings are going to be very even from one end to the other, and the flex in the hackamore will be consistent. This particular hackamore has only the anchor. The band is complete and it has only the anchor buttons in place. These kangaroo hide strings are sewn through the plats of the hackamore itself, so they won't move. The hackamore, before you start braiding, you make a core. Cores come in a few different styles. The little bozal that I showed you, that 1/2 incher, is made on a core very much like this one. It's a double twist core. It's made of a single twist of rawhide like this that's been sanded, this one with my shoeing rasp, and then a second twist of rawhide is put over the top of it, going the other direction. So if your core is twisted clockwise, your over twist will be counterclockwise. It takes a little bit of tending to get the over twist to cure nice and tight. And then you can see that this core has been sanded. I sand all my cores either with a shoeing rasp or a belt sander to make them nice and consistent. And then I flex the cores before I braid on them to make sure that they're going to be consistent from one end to the other. And if there's a soft spot, I cut it right there at that spot. This core is a single twist that has 6 other strings well beveled, braided over it, and then the whole thing was sanded. I also use Rawhide braid for a core, and then sometimes I will use layers of rawhide laid down and sewn together. That makes a nice stiff core for a 2-rein bozal, for a small bozal that you use when you're finishing a horse in the final stages of his training. After the band of the hackamore is braided, the nose button is tied on. The nose button rests on a foundation. This is a completed nose button foundation. We'll braid on this here in a little while, but I've wrapped my nose button foundation from one end to the other with good springy, hard rawhide string. And the reason I've done that is because when the hackamore is complete, I want there to be a lot of flex in that nose button. I don't want the nose button to be stiff and blocky. I've used other materials for a nose button for a couple years, for a couple bozals a long time ago. I used a piece of skirting leather and it made the nose button so stiff that it just wouldn't function properly. So I wrapped the nose button with rawhide, and then I've covered that wrap of rawhide with some thin layers of kangaroo skin, and you can see that I have sanded that kangaroo skin away, and that gives me a nicely contoured nose button, one that's going to be horse-shaped on the inside. It won't have a lump, but it'll have a little bit of a swell to accommodate my interweave and to add a little bit of extra displacement up there at the top. Once the hackamore nose button has been tied and is completed, the heel knot is spliced into place. That's where the 16 strings from each end of the band are all spliced together. This is a modified Ortega splice. I have put a leather plug in there. That's something that I learned to do from Bill Black, though Bill Dorrance did that. Merle McMullen from Jersey did that. A few braiders have done that in the past. Ernie LeDucker did that. That plug is a nice thing to have. It gives you a little bit of room for your McCarty. I like to take 4 strings and crown them all the way around, and then braid into a ring knot, and then I will take another 12 strings and I will crown them the other way and braid them very tightly. I work them through with my pliers that have polished jaws so that the strings aren't damaged. I'll tighten my braid like so. And then once that's done, I will put on my heel knot foundation, and then I will tie the heel knot itself on. I like tying heel knots. This is my signature heel knot. It's a diamond knot. Many years ago, my brother worked for an outfit called the Lucky Diamond, and I worked real hard to figure out how to tie a button that had diamonds on it for him. This type of boselle, by the way, is called a center hung boselle. It has a declivity in the nose button, and the hanger goes there, and the hanger either ties to the horse's forelock or else it's a loop that goes up around his ears. This is a nesting hearts heel knot, which is pretty fun. This is the type of heel knot that is most common. This is called a pineapple knot. This particular pineapple knot has, well, I call it a wandering worm button. I suppose it has other names. As far as I know, Louis Ortega was the first guy to use this as a decorative motif. If other guys were using it before him, I don't know. He used a lot of color in his braiding a little later on in his career, and you see this wandering worm motif come up. But the knot that's most typically used is a typical pineapple knot like this. This is off of a Cholula lid. Cholula lids get a lot of braided knots, and it has different color on the top and a different color on the bottom, and the reason it has that is because this is an overbite pineapple. So we'll spend some time tying that together later.